Okay, this is Paul, obviously, and I'm here with my physical therapist, Wendy, and we're going to talk a little bit about the injury that I've had going on in my leg, and why it occurred, what we're doing to fix it, and the exercises that we're doing to make it better. So, talk a little bit about when we saw each other the other night. We went through the diagnosis. A lot of people, because it's kind of there's a lateral pain in the leg, but it's kind of deep, buried underneath. At first, I thought myself that it might have been possibly a hip flexor. And since everybody on the internet's an expert, everybody offered do this, do that, and I'm pretty good at diagnosing things myself, and you know that, going through my own physical therapy. But nothing seemed to work. There was no amount of foam rolling that fixed it. There's no amount of stretching. There was no amount of anything that I was doing that I knew to do that could fix the pain that I was having. So talk to me a little bit about what we went through the other night.
Trying to isolate a mechanism of injury, which you couldn't really isolate anything specific. A slow onset, which a lot of times is more indicative of a chronic problem,
right,
or a tenosynovitis, or an inflammation of some sort. Usually tendon or muscle tendon junction. What the heck is that noise?
Yeah.
Anyway, so for him, there's 4 heads of the quad, and really just one crosses the hip, so that's where you were thinking probably hip flexor or
right,
quad.
That's what I thought, hip flexor, because the pain was close to that
right,
general area, but it wasn't hip flexor.
Right, so when we got hip flexion, we couldn't reproduce it. When we had knee extension or knee flexion, we could reproduce it, so we could definitely say quad, but not the one that crosses at the hip. So then we isolated it a little bit more to the deep head of one of the 4 heads of the quad that is deep, and it attaches kind of midway up the femur deep.
Right.
And then I tested it out, and we kind of isolated it to that, and then we had to find out how you would just strain such an isolated part of the quad. So we watched your movement patterns, because clearly when you're squatting or doing anything that's multi-level, multi-joint, you've got a chain of reaction that occurs when you're transferring force from the ground, and anytime you put a load on it, you can exacerbate something that is happening. So when he was squatting, he had a stance that was altered, and he didn't know it, and he had kind of a corkscrew effect when he went down, and a lateral shift in the pelvis that caused the majority of the force to be taken at the quad. The hip flexor was out of it because of the range that he was in the squat, so that when he would come back up, hip flexor's not kicking in. Glutes were incredibly weak in comparison to the quads, so
right,
then he had to really fire with the closed pack position in the knee. It's going to pull at that deep head of the quad.
Right, and obviously this has never been, I've been squatting for a long, long time. This has never happened before. So, we can always guess as to why that happened. Obviously something over time changed in the mechanics of my squat that caused...
We call that an insidious onset.
Right, so something in the mechanics in my squat changed, so that glute became quiet in the squat, and then I started getting that
compensate.
Yeah, that rotation in the hip, and then so something in there had to start compensating for the fact that the glute wasn't firing as hard anymore.
Right.
Because the left glute we tested and it was fine.
Fine.
Yeah, so it literally came back to the right glute had become dormant.
Dormant.
So something in the mechanics changed over time to make that happen. So let's go through the exercises that we've been doing to help kind of even things out. So you want to do the one on the floor first?
Yeah, well,
because you always like to make fun of me, because you like, anytime that you do something on me, you're always like, well, here's this big strong guy, and you put me in these positions where I can't move anything, and it makes me feel awful.
Right. But we also, because it is an acute exacerbation of probably a chronic condition that was occurring, there's an inflammation component, and we did recommend an ice protocol for the inflammation, because you got to quiet down the inflammation too.
Right.
So you got to treat the local injury, and then you have to treat the muscle imbalance. So you have to stretch the short and tight muscles and strengthen the long and weak.
Right. Okay.
So we start with the stretch, because short and tight always wins over long and weak.
So the stretch, which is awful, it goes like this.
And for him, in order to pull the hip flexor out of it and isolate, you got to get